The lantern light flickered against the rough-hewn beams of the barn, casting long, dancing shadows against the hay bales. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat as she heard the heavy crunch of boots on the gravel outside. She wasn't supposed to be here, not at this hour, and certainly not with him. In her trembling hand, she clutched the small hand-carved wooden bird Daniel had slipped into her market basket earlier that day. It was a promise, but it was also evidence. If her dead found her now, the peace of their farm would be shattered forever. She looked at Daniel, his blue eyes wide with fear and adoration, and knew that the choice she made in the next 10 seconds would change their lives for eternity. The morning mist still clung to the low valleys of Lancaster County, lying thick and white like a wool blanket over the sleeping earth. It was that hush before the dawn, the time of day Sarah Yoder loved best. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp soil and the faint, sweet smell of the curing tobacco in the shed. Inside the farmhouse, the silence was only broken by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a steady heartbeat that had paced the Yoder family's life for 3 generations. Sarah moved quietly in the kitchen, her bare feet silent on the linoleum floor. She lit the kerosene lamp, the glass chimney clouding for a moment before the flame caught and bathed the room in a warm golden glow. It was baking day. It's a sourdough starter, kept alive by her mom and her grandmother before that, sat bubbling gently in the crock on the counter. Sarah's hands, strong and capable, began to work the dough. Eating bread was a prayer in itself. It was a rhythm of push and pull of patience and strength. As she worked, her mind drifted, as it often did lately, to the property line that separated her father's farm from the neighbors to the west, the Millers. Just the name caused a tightness in her chest. For 20 years, since before Sarah was born, the Yoders and the Millers had not spoken a word to one another beyond what was absolutely necessary for business. A dispute over a drainage ditch and a flooded crop had turned into a bitterness that hardened like clay in the sun. Sarah. Her mother's voice was soft, heavy with sleep coming from the doorway. "You are up early, daughter." "The bread won't rise itself, Mom," Sarah said, smiling over her shoulder. "And the market wagon leaves in 2 hours. Wanted the sticky buns to be fresh." Her mother nodded, tightening the strings of her cap under her chin. "You work too hard, but your sticky buns are the reason we pay the seed bill in the spring. God has blessed your hands." Later that morning, the sun had burned off the mist, revealing a sky of piercing blue. The buggy ride to the Green Dragon Market was bumpy, the rhythmic clop, clop, clop of their horse, Bessie, acting as a lullaby for Sarah's younger brother, Amish, who dozed in the back. Sarah sat up front with her father. Isaac Yoder was a good man, a righteous man, but he was as unyielding as an oak tree in winter. He stared straight ahead, his beard brushing the top of his black vest, his hands guiding the reins with practiced ease. "We will set up near the produce stand today," Isaac said, his voice gravelly. "Stay away from the lower aisle." Sarah knew why. The lower aisle was where the Millers sold their furniture. Daniel Miller made rocking chairs and cedar chests that were famous all the way to Philadelphia. When they arrived, the market was already bustling. Englishers with their cameras and bright clothes moved in swarms, buying jams and quilts. Sarah arranged her baked goods, loaves of wheat bread, shoe-fly pies with crumbling tops, and her famous sticky buns, glistening with caramel and pecans. It was around noon when the crowd thinned. Sarah was wiping crumbs from the table when she felt eyes on her. It was a sensation like a warm hand on her shoulder. She looked up. Across the way, standing near a stack of oak lumber, was Daniel. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained against his blue shirt. He'd removed his straw hat to wipe his brow, revealing hair the color of dried wheat. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking directly at her, their eyes locked. In that busy market, amidst the noise of haggling tourists and rattling carts, the world seemed to go silent. It wasn't a look of defiance. It was a look of recognition, like two notes in a hymn that harmonized perfectly. Daniel gave the slightest nod, a microscopic dip of his chin. Sarah felt a flush rise from her neck to her cheeks. She quickly looked down at her pies, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew the stories. She knew the rules. But she also knew that looking at Daniel Miller felt more like home than her own front porch. 3 weeks had passed since the market. The summer was deepening, the corn stalks reaching high towards the sun, rustling and whispering in the breeze. The boundary between the Yoder and Miller farms was marked by a meandering creek, shaded by weeping willows and ancient sycamores. It was a place of shadows and cool water, hidden from the view of both farmhouses. Sarah had taken to walking there in the evenings, telling her parents she was looking for wild mint or berries. In truth, she was looking for him. It was a Tuesday evening, the air thick with humidity and the sound of cicadas, when she saw him. He was sitting on a fallen log on his side of the creek, whittling a piece of wood. He stood up as she approached the bank. He didn't cross the water, and neither did she. The creek bubbled between them, a natural barrier that mirrored the social chasm of their families. "The mint is growing thick this year," Daniel said softly. His voice was deep, steady. "It is," Sarah replied, clutching her basket. "Good for tea." I brought you something," Daniel said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. He stepped onto a large stone in the middle of the creek and extended his hand. Sarah stepped onto a stone from her side. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his rough, calloused palm. The touch sent a jolt through her, terrifying and wonderful. She took the object. It was a small wooden bird carved from cherry wood. It was smooth as glass, polished to perfection. The wings were spread as if in flight. "It's a wren," Daniel explained, his ears turning pink. "I see them in the barn sometimes. They're small, but they sing the loudest songs." "It's beautiful, Daniel," Sarah whispered. "But I cannot keep this, if my dead sees it." "Hide it," Daniel said, his blue eyes searching hers. "Throw it in the water. But know that I made it thinking of you." They stood there on the slippery stones, balanced between two worlds. "Why do our fathers hate each other so much?" Sarah asked, the question that had plagued her since childhood. Daniel sighed, looking up at the canopy of leaves. "Pride, Sarah. It is the sin of pride. My father believes yours cheated him. Yours believes mine, judged him unfairly. They have built a wall of anger so high they can no longer see the sun." "It isn't right," Sarah said. "No," Daniel agreed. "It is not the way of Jesus. We are taught to forgive 70 times 7. But sometimes, the old ways, they are hard to break." He looked at her then, with an intensity that made her knees weak. "But I do not hate you, Sarah Yoder, and I do not hate you, Daniel Miller." For the next month, the creek became their sanctuary. They met twice a week, always at dusk. They didn't touch again, honoring the strict courtship rules of their people, but their souls entangled. They talked of everything. Daniel spoke of his desire to build furniture that would last 100 years, creating heirlooms rather than just chairs. Sarah spoke of her love for the colors of the sunset, how she wished she could weave those colors into a quilt without being called vain. They read scripture to each other. They prayed together, standing on opposite banks of the creek, heads bowed as the fireflies began to dance over the water. It was a courtship of words and spirit, pure and dangerous. The harvest moon hung low and heavy, an orange orb over the cornfields. It was late September. The air had turned crisp, requiring a shawl in the evenings. Sarah was in her room, sitting by the window. She had the wooden wren in her hand, tracing the curve of its wing with her thumb. She had kept it hidden in a hollowed-out section of her mattress, a secret that burned under her every night. Suddenly, the door to her room opened. She gasped, trying to shove the bird into her apron pocket, but she was too slow. It was her mother, Miriam. But behind her stood Isaac, her father. Oh! His face was a mask of thunder. "What do you have there, Sarah?" Isaac demanded. His voice wasn't loud. It was terrifyingly quiet. "Nothing, dead," Sarah stammered. Isaac crossed the room in 2 strides. He held out his hand. "Give it to me." Trembling, Sarah placed the wooden bird in his massive palm. Isaac examined it in the lamplight. He turned it over. On the bottom, carved in tiny, precise letters, were the initials DM. The silence in the room was deafening. It felt as though all the air had been sucked out. Miller Isaac spat the name as if it were poison. "You have been seeing the Miller boy? ... We talk. Dead," Sarah cried, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "Only talk. He is good. He loves God. He is the son of a man who called me a thief." Isaac's voice rose, shaking the rafters. "It is from a house of pride and lies. Do you know what this means, Sarah? Do you know the danger you put your soul in? It is not a sin to love." Sarah shouted back, a defiance she didn't know she possessed rising up. "The feud is the sin. You hold on to anger like a treasure, but it is rotting our family." Her mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Isaac's face went pale, looked at the wooden bird, then at his daughter. He walked to the window and threw the bird out into the dark night. "You will not leave this farm," Isaac commanded. "You will not go to the market. You will not go to the youth singing on Sunday. If I see you near that creek, or if I hear that you have spoken to him, I will go to the bishop even if it is his own father, and I will demand a confession before the church. Do you understand?" "Isaac, please," Miriam pleaded, touching his arm. "She must learn," Isaac said, his voice breaking with a mixture of rage and sorrow. "We are separate. We are plain. We do not mix with those who wrong us until they repent." He stormed out of the room. Miriam looked at Sarah, her eyes full of sadness. "He is trying to protect you, Sarah," she whispered. "He is breaking my heart," Sarah sobbed. October arrived with cold rains and gray skies. The farmhouse felt like a prison. Sarah went about her chores like a ghost. The joy had gone out of her baking. The bread was heavy. The pies lacked their usual sweetness. She didn't see Daniel. She couldn't. Her father kept her under constant watch. When she went to the barn to milk, her brother Amos was sent with her. When she hung laundry, her mother sat on the porch, peeling potatoes, watching. But the silence was the loudest part. The absence of Daniel's voice, the lack of his steady presence, left a hole in Sarah's life that nothing could fill. She prayed for strength. She prayed to forget him. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the blue of his eyes and the gentle way he held the wood. Word reached her through the grapevine of the women after church service that Daniel was being courted by Rebecca Stoltzfus, sensible girl, a girl from a family with no feuds. The news felt like a physical blow. Sarah sat in the back of the buggy on the ride home, staring at the muddy road, feeling a coldness seep into her bones that the quilt could not keep out. One rainy Tuesday, Sarah was in the cellar, sorting apples. She heard a tapping on the high, small window that sat at ground level. She froze. Tap, tap, tap. She dragged a crate over and climbed up to peer through the dusty glass. There, crouched in the mud, soaked to the bone, was Daniel. She fumbled with the latch and pushed the window open, just a crack. "Daniel, you cannot be here. If Dead finds you, ... "I had to know," Daniel said, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, his face pale and drawn. "They say you are sick. They say you do not come out." "I am sick at heart," Sarah whispered. "My father knows. He has forbidden it." Sarah Daniel pressed his face close to the opening. "My father is pushing for me to marry Rebecca. He wants to announce it in November." Sarah felt the tears hot behind her eyes. "She is a good girl, Daniel." "She is not you," Daniel said fiercely. "I will not do it. I will leave first." "Leave?" Sarah gasped. "Leave the community? Go English?" "I have an uncle in Ohio," Daniel said. "He left the church years ago. He owns a carpentry shop. I could work there. I could go tonight. I have a buggy waiting down the road." The offer hung in the damp air of the cellar. To leave the rules, the ordnung, the bonnets and the beards, to leave the judgment and the feud, to be free with Daniel. But to leave meant to leave her mother, to leave Amos, to never hear her father's voice again, even if it was angry, to be shunned, to be cut off from the only life and faith she had ever known. Sarah looked at Daniel's desperate face. She reached her hand through the crack, and for the first time she touched his face. His skin was cold and wet, his beard rough. "I cannot," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I cannot leave my family, Daniel. I cannot break my mother's heart to save my own." Daniel closed his eyes, leaning into her hand. "Then what do we do?" "We pray," Sarah said, pulling her hand back as she heard footsteps upstairs. "We trust that if this is right, God will make a way. Go, Daniel, please go." He looked at her one last time, a look of pure agony, and then disappeared into the rain. November brought the first frost. The ground was hard as iron. It happened on a Wednesday. A barn raising was scheduled for the Zook family who had lost their barn to a lightning strike in the summer. The entire community was required to attend. It was one of the few times the Yoders and Millers would be in the same place, working for a common good. The men worked on the frame, climbing high on the beams, swinging hammers in unison. The women cooked in the summer kitchen, preparing mountains of mashed potatoes, roast beef, and coleslaw. The tension between Isaac Yoder and Bishop Miller, Daniel's father, was palpable. They worked on opposite ends of the barn, never speaking, their movements stiff. Around midday a shout went up. "Hold, the rope! The rope is snapping!" Like peeling apples near the window. Looked out. A massive main beam was being hoisted by ropes and pulleys. Directly underneath it, giving instructions, was the bishop, Daniel's father. With a sickening crack, the main pulley sheared off. The beam plummeted. "Look out." It wasn't Daniel who moved. He was too far away on the roof. It was Isaac Yoder. Sarah's father, seeing the danger, didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, tackling the bishop, shoving him out of the path of the falling timber. The beam crashed into the earth with a thunderous boom, sending up a cloud of dust and debris. Silence fell over the crowd. Sarah ran from the kitchen, her heart in her throat. Dead. When the dust cleared, the bishop was lying on his back, shaken but unharmed. Isaac Yoder lay beside him, his leg pinned under the heavy beam. Men rushed forward. Heave. Together now. Heave. It took 10 men to lift the timber. They pulled Isaac free. His leg was broken badly, but he was alive. The bishop sat up, dusting off his coat, looked at the shattered beam, then at the man who had been his enemy for 20 years. Ideally, he should have been crushed. Isaac gritted his teeth against the pain as they laid him on a stretcher. He looked up and met the bishop's eyes. "Why?" the bishop asked, his voice trembling. "Why did you save me, Isaac?" Isaac took a ragged breath. "Because you are my neighbor. And because ... because I am tired of the hate. It is too heavy a burden to carry to the grave." The bishop, a man known for his sternness, felt tears fill his eyes. He knelt in the dirt beside Isaac and took his hand. "Forgive me, Isaac. Forgive me for my pride." "We are forgiven," Isaac whispered. Sarah stood at the edge of the circle, weeping. She felt a presence beside her. It was Daniel. He didn't touch her, but he stood close enough that their shoulders brushed. They watched as their fathers, the architects of their separation, washed away 20 years of bitterness with a handshake in the dirt. 6 months later, May. The apple blossoms were in full bloom, turning the orchard into a cloud of pink and white confetti. The wedding service had been 3 hours long, held in the Yoder's barn. The benches were hard, the sermons were long, but to Sarah it felt like a moment out of time. She wore the blue dress she had sewn herself, her new white apron crisp and bright. As they sat at the wedding table, the ex-Sarah looked down the long rows of guests. She saw her father, leaning on a cane, laughing with the bishop. The wall was gone. The fence was mended. Daniel sat beside her. Under the table where no one could see, he reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm and solid. "You look beautiful, Sarah Miller," he whispered. Sarah smiled, squeezing his hand. "And you look like a man who finally got his sticky buns." Daniel chuckled, a low, happy sound. The camera pans out from the barn, drifting over the green fields, the white farmhouses, and the winding creek. The sun is setting, casting a golden light over the land. We dissolve to a scene years later. An older Sarah and Daniel sit on the front porch. Daniel is whittling a small piece of wood. Sarah is quilting. 3 children play in the yard, chasing fireflies as the dusk settles. Daniel hands the small object to a little girl with blonde braids. It is a wooden wren. "For me dead?" she asks. "For you," he says, looking at Sarah with that same love that started in a crowded market years ago. Because the smallest birds sing the loudest songs,